living with my parents again. The reality of my failed marriage hit me like a crashing wave. I had once believed that marriage would bring happiness, but it had been nothing more than an illusion. The man I trusted had been using me all along, and my in-laws, despite their outward kindness, had ultimately turned their backs on me. His mother and sister, lost in their own naivete, seemed oblivious to the practicalities of life. When the threat of being kicked out loomed over me, I found myself questioning the very meaning of family. The answer was clear: I needed to take control. Without hesitation, I reached out to everyone I needed, setting my next steps into motion. As for the household items, I arranged for their removal the following day. The furniture and appliances disappeared one by one, and only then did my husband, so indifferent until now, begin to panic. I am Michelle Thompson, 35 years old, and I have worked from home since college. Though I travel for work once a month, my company has always been understanding. A motorcycle accident in my college years left me in a wheelchair, and despite years of rehabilitation, there was little hope of regaining mobility. I had come to terms with it, believing a life of solitude was inevitable. That was until a blind date changed everything. Introduced through friends, I met Ken, 5 years older than me, full of energy, and blunt to the point of rudeness, yet his directness intrigued me. Unlike most, he didn't dance around my disability. He asked honest questions, wanting to understand my life. Instead of feeling pitted, I felt seen. I convinced myself that happiness awaited me with Ken. After just 6 months, when he proposed, I accepted without hesitation. But marriage was not what I had imagined. Ken and I moved into my house, technically a rental, but spacious, modern, and designed for accessibility. It had been modified by a previous tenant, and Ken had admired its convenience. Since I was home most of the time, I naturally took on the household chores. When I asked for help, Ken would wave me off, claiming exhaustion. Bathing, which was already a challenge, became even harder when he refused to assist. Worse, he left things out of place, turning a simple task into an ordeal. The house was meant to accommodate me, but Ken's indifference made it feel like an obstacle course. Over time, I saw the truth. Ken wasn't drawn to me, he was drawn to my house, my appliances, my ability to manage despite my disability. He had no job, spent his nights drinking, and relied on me financially. Still, I clung to the hope that there was love somewhere in our marriage. Seeking advice, I turned to his mother, but she dismissed my concerns. Friends, too, told me to be patient, and so, I endured. Then, Ken came to me with an announcement: he wanted his parents to move in. I was stunned. His parents had a home of their own, why uproot them? Our space was designed for accessibility, but that didn't mean it could comfortably fit 4 people. I worked from home. Sharing the space would be disruptive. You always think about yourself, huh? I never knew you were this selfish, Ken accused. I'm just asking why they need to live here. Their home is perfectly fine. This house was designed for accessibility, for me. But Ken didn't care. His parents arrived within days, making it clear they had been planning this all along. Then, his mother said something that made my blood run cold. You know, Michelle, maybe you should consider a facility. A facility? It would be good for you, don't you think? You have your limits. In a facility, everything would be taken care of. That's when I understood. Ken didn't just want his parents to move in, he wanted me out. I'd visit you from time to time, he added, as if that would soften the blow. Something inside me snapped. Ken, what am I to you? I'm your wife, aren't I? Would you really send your wife to a facility? Ken scoffed. When did I ever say I loved you? His words burned. All this time, I had been blind. Ken had never seen me as his partner, only as a convenience. And now, I was nothing more than an obstacle in his perfect setup. Then he said something even worse. My parents are staying. You, an outsider, can go live in some cheap facility. I stared at him, my heart pounding. What did you just say? It was in that moment I knew, I had to walk away. I turned to Ken's parents, hoping for some sense of reason, but they only grinned, eerily, as if they had won some twisted game. Why are you smiling? What's so funny? I demanded. Had they set their sights on my home long before the marriage? Everything was moving too fast. I needed to put an end to this, now. Please leave, I said firmly. What, you're telling my parents to leave? Ken's voice rose with indignation. How can you talk to them like that? For the first time, I felt like I was seeing the real Ken, angry, entitled, and completely unhinged. If he cared so much about his parents, Why hadn't he worked hard to buy them a house? Why did he think he could just take mine? My head felt like it was on fire. It's okay, Ken, his mother said smoothly. Michelle must be a little shocked. After all, we did come without warning. We just wanted to check the place out today, his father added. Yeah, before we move in. Seems like there are even more appliances than before. It looks really comfortable. They weren't just visiting, they were staking their claim. A wave of unease crashed over me. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to think, if I left, how did they expect to sustain themselves? Ken was a part-time worker, his parents lived off a pension, and I had been covering everything: rent, utilities, groceries. Did they even realize that Ken wasn't the one paying the $2,800 monthly rent? But none of that seemed to concern them. Cheerfully, they walked out, with Ken trailing behind. I'm staying at my parents' tonight, he announced. Wait, we need to talk. There's nothing to discuss. I'm the man of the house. I've made my decision, and that's final. I watched him leave, stunned, but I didn't stay frozen for long. I picked up my phone and called a real estate agent. The next morning, when Ken returned, he took one look at the neatly packed boxes and smirked. Oh, so you've started packing? Found a place already? Yes, I have. He blinked, clearly thrown off by how fast I'd acted. Then I handed him a business card. Here's the contact for a divorce lawyer. From now on, we'll communicate through them. Ken's smirk vanished. What, divorce? Why? I met his gaze. If you're planning to kick me out, then what's the point of being married? Ken's face twisted in disbelief, as if reality had just smacked him across the face. You can't live without me, right? I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Who else would marry you? I almost laughed. Did he really think I needed him? But you were the one who wanted to get married, he pressed, sounding desperate. It was at that moment I truly saw him for what he was: overconfident, arrogant, and utterly foolish. Ken had assumed I was a lonely, disabled woman with no options, someone easy to manipulate. He had been so sure I'd never leave. After all, I was financially independent, worked from home, and did all the household chores. For him, I was the perfect setup, money coming in without him lifting a finger. That's why he was so shocked now. You know, if you divorce me, you'll probably be single forever, he said, grasping at straws. If my only alternative is a marriage like this, I'd rather be single forever, I replied, and whether I stay single or not isn't up to you. I could see panic creeping into his expression. For the first time, he realized I wasn't the submissive woman he had thought I was. I didn't mean to rush you into a facility or anything, he backtracked. You don't have to move out right away. Oh, it's fine, I said with a smile. I'll do as you wish. He scoffed. You won't find a place that fast. Think it over, okay? I already secured one. His eyes widened. What? Wait, isn't this too soon? I stayed calm. The facility staff are already informed. Everything's set. His jaw clenched. Wait, when did you even set all this up? Were you planning this all along? Yes, long before I even met you. Ken looked like he had been punched in the gut. I had always been prepared for my future. After my accident, I spent my hospital recovery reading investment books. I had diversified my income, using both my salary and inheritance to build financial stability. The place I was moving into? It wasn't just a care facility, it was a high-end, fully accessible condo I had purchased years ago and had been renting out for passive income. Ken never knew. I had kept that asset a secret. Desperation flashed across his face. We don't have to get a divorce. I get it. You can stay here. Let's live with my parents. I sighed. Are you still not getting it? Why would I ever do that? He still thought he was my only option. Sorry, but my mind's made up. His face twisted with frustration. You're so selfish. If you come crawling back later, don't expect me to take you in. I shrugged. I won't, so don't worry. Ken stood there, fists clenched, silent for a long time. I ignored him and continued packing. At some point, I heard him making a phone call, probably to his parents. Pathetic. Even now, he couldn't make a decision on his own. Eventually, he turned to me. Fine, he spat. We'll get a divorce. Just leave quickly. I could tell he was only agreeing because he thought he didn't need me. He had a fully furnished house and his parents to rely on, at least, for now. Without another word, he stormed out. I packed and moved within a week. Ken never showed up again during that time. A day after I had settled into my new home, he called me outside. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, looking around in disbelief. "This place is empty, where are the appliances?" "I had them picked up," I said simply. "All the furniture and appliances belong to me." Ken's face turned red. "We need to split the property." His parents chimed in. "That's right, we can't live here like this." I folded my arms. "What are you talking about? Nobody can live here." Ken narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" "The rent is $2,000 a month." Silence. I could see the shock sink in. "This isn't your house, Ken. I told you that when we got married." "No, but," his voice trailed off. "I got a discount because I knew the real estate agent, but now that I'm leaving, the rent is going up. This is a specialized property with accessibility features. I've already had multiple inquiries from people who need a place like this." Ken's parents stood frozen, their faces pale. They had assumed they could just live here for free. Ken swallowed hard, realizing, maybe for the first time, that he had lost everything. And I had never felt lighter. I told them firmly, "It's time to move out." Ken's mother immediately became agitated. "Why didn't you tell us sooner? What are we supposed to do now?" "I don't know," I replied coolly. "I did tell Ken. I didn't hear anything about it." Ken shot back, his voice rising with frustration. "You can sue me if you want," he sneered, as if that was going to intimidate me. I raised an eyebrow. "You can try, but do you even have the money for that? Because I don't think you do." Ken's face twisted into a snarl, realizing the truth. He couldn't afford a lawyer, let alone a lawsuit. Even if he managed to scrape something together, I had a trump card ready. I pulled out my phone and showed them the pictures. "When did you take these?" Ken asked, his voice faltering. The photos clearly showed him gambling and womanizing, indulging in his reckless lifestyle with my money. "I spent my money on this, Ken," I said, my voice calm yet firm, "and I'm ready to use these in court if it comes to that." "What the hell?" Ken shouted, his anger shifting from disbelief to full-blown rage. His parents, however, seemed genuinely rattled by the photos. "What's going on here?" his mother demanded, growing more frantic. Then, for the first time, Ken started to apologize. "I'm sorry, Michelle, please come back. I need you." His voice cracked. "You're the one who kicked me out," I reminded him, my tone cold. "We're already divorced, so what are you talking about?" Ken stood there, suddenly quiet. "Besides, you don't love me, do you? If that's the case, I'll leave. I'm not going to stand around for your pity party." This time, even his parents joined in, their voices filled with desperation. "We don't have a place to live anymore." That stopped me in my tracks. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Our house, it got foreclosed on," Ken's father explained with a defeated sigh. "We're bankrupt. The debt kept piling up and now, it's too late." Everything started to fall into place. Ken had probably married me hoping to find some kind of financial support. His parents had been kind before the wedding, but now I understood why. They needed something from me, and they'd been counting on it. "I can't help you," I said, feeling a wave of finality. "We're strangers now. Even if my family and I end up homeless, it's not your problem." Ken's face hardened, his ulterior motives laid bare for the first time. "You brought this on yourself," I continued, my voice steady. "I'm not giving you a single piece of furniture or electronics. That's final. Please, Michelle, have some mercy." "It's too late for mercy," I replied, shaking my head. "Sort it out on your own." Ken was persistent, as was his father, but I remained firm. "If you can't pay the rent, then move out," I told them bluntly. "This place is in my name. If I cancel the lease, that's the end of it." Evicting them was almost too easy. The lease would be cancelled, and Ken wouldn't be able to afford it. The real estate agent confirmed as much. "I can't pay the rent," Ken finally admitted, looking defeated. With that, I made the decision. I no longer needed this place. The divorce was final, and it was time to move on. Within the week, I'd kicked out the stunned family of 3, locked the door behind me, and moved on with my life. "What are we going to do now?" Ken asked, his voice tinged with panic. "I'm moving into a facility," I replied calmly. "Goodbye." As I left them standing there, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I had made the right choice. Ken's bitter words echoed in my mind. Good luck in that crappy environment. But it wasn't a crappy environment at all. A few days later, Ken showed up at my new home, this luxury facility where I had moved. His eyes widened when he saw it. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "It's not crappy at all," I said with a smile. "This is a luxury facility worth over $1 million. I had been saving for years, and with the income from my investments, I was able to purchase this place. The previous resident had just moved out, and I was able to move in immediately. With the proceeds from selling my house and the extra income from my investments, I was more than financially secure." This place was far from the sterile, oppressive facilities he probably imagined. It was a beautiful, well-maintained community with on-site doctors and helpers. The apartment-like layout offered plenty of privacy, and it felt like a true home. "I can call for help with the push of a button," I explained. "They assist with bathing, and I even have a 3-bedroom unit. There are families and couples here, people just like me." Ken was speechless. "Why did you?" He was struggling to understand. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stared at him coldly. "Because I don't want you here. We're strangers now. Please leave." Ken suddenly shifted his tone, acting all sweet and remorseful. "Honestly, it's creepy. Can't you let me stay here? I'm living in a motel now. It's pitiful. I can't even get a job because I don't have a permanent address." His words dripped with insincerity. In an instant, he had abandoned his own parents and now only thought about himself. "Why?" I asked, growing increasingly frustrated. "Why don't you look at yourself in the mirror? You're pathetic. You spent your life living off your parents, freeloaded after marriage, and now you're begging on the streets, and you think you can come here?" Ken's face turned bright red with embarrassment. "You're not ashamed to be clinging to your ex-wife?" He looked around, noticing the other residents peering from their balconies, watching with curious eyes. I had arranged it beforehand, anticipating that Ken might show up. I knew he would come, either to gloat over my supposed misery or to beg for help. The residents were more than willing to indulge me, offering sympathetic looks in Ken's direction. It was like watching a real-life drama unfold. "I want to applaud them," one resident said, her voice full of approval. Ken, finally realizing how embarrassing his behavior was, mumbled something incoherent and left, his face pale and deflated. I didn't think he'd come back after that. A few days later, I ran into my mother-in-law at a local supermarket. She was working as a cashier, and my father-in-law was a janitor. As soon as she spotted me, she quickly turned away, trying to hide her face. I saw her being reprimanded by a younger employee for her attitude. Ken, meanwhile, had found a low-paying job at a cafe he'd met someone at. Apparently, he was being exploited, just like his parents had been. Meanwhile, I was living my best life. I hosted regular home parties, enjoyed the company of my new friends from the facility, and even made a few close relationships with other wheelchair users. If I'd known about this kind of community earlier, I would have moved here much sooner. I attended physical therapy sessions regularly, and my goal now was to regain the ability to walk on my own. Every day felt like a new chapter, full of growth and new opportunities. I was finally living the life I deserved.